Right away, we began canvassing our nonprofit partners and the health and human services sector to really try to understand what the agencies that we work with on a daily basis were seeing as needs in the community.
Welcome to Insider, the official podcast for the City of Murfreesboro. I'm Mike Browning. Our topic, the United Way of Rutherford and Cannon counties amid COVID-19. Our guest is Meagan Flippin. She's the president and CEO of the United Way of Rutherford and Cannon counties. Ms. Flippin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're still dealing with COVID-19. How has the United Way responded in that crisis?
Sure. So I think the most interesting thing about this crisis is how quickly it accelerated. It seemed as though almost overnight, so much of what we knew as our normal came to a stop. And so right away, we began canvassing our nonprofit partners and the health and human services sector to really try to understand what the agencies that we work with on a daily basis were seeing as needs in the community. And so as a result, on March 17th, we launched a COVID-19 response fund through United Way. And on March 24th, we launched RutherfordCannonRelief.com. And so that website is actually a consortium of all kinds of resources, not only for individuals who may be in need, but also for organizations who may be in need as well, or may have questions that they need answered. That's also an opportunity for the COVID-19 Response Fund to receive donations, as well as it's an opportunity for us to promote some of the volunteer opportunities that are available right now in the community. As you might can imagine, many people right now want to volunteer and want to help, but as a result of COVID, volunteer efforts are somewhat limited at the moment, so we've posted opportunities to be able to do that. We also have a few programs that we have shared through that website that are ongoing programs of United Way, such as our prescription discount card through FamilyWise and our VITA Income Tax Assistance Program, which now has transitioned to a virtual setting through July 15th.
So when you initially decided to do a little bit more by having like a COVID-19 response with some numbers or website, whatever it was the feeling that this was going to be a situation in which there would be a need for an extra response?
Absolutely. What we saw right away through our 2-on-1 information and referral service was a spike of more than 50% in need related to housing and food. And so right away, at the end of March, we saw that to be the case. Many of the agencies that we work with had an increased demand for services as people maybe were losing their job or losing income. They were having a need for those basic services such as food, shelter, utility assistance.
Let's get into that a little bit deeper. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand that suddenly someone is calling a number and they're saying, I need food, or I need help with food, or I need help with housing. What are some of those conversations like with people?
So when someone calls 211, they're immediately connected with a trained information referral services specialist. And so that person is not a volunteer. It's somebody who is there day in and day out, who has experience in working with people in crisis. And so immediately that specialist is going to begin asking questions of the caller to try to get a more thorough picture of what their need is. And from there, they're able to identify more than 4,000 different services in the Middle Tennessee area that person could be connected to. And so they're able to make that connection for that person and immediately refer them right to that agency or that service that they are in need of.
We discussed the obvious needs of food and housing, but what are some of the resources that are available to people that call or need help from you?
Yeah, so food and housing are the top right now that we're seeing. We're also seeing calls related to mental health and substance abuse, as well as child care issues. And so those four areas have most certainly been on our radar as we're looking at funds from the COVID-19 Response Fund and how we're granting those dollars out. So far we've been able to provide some support related to allowing recovery groups to have virtual meetings and providing some funding so that they can have those meetings. Since they can't have them in person, they can have them virtually and continue with their recovery. In addition, we've also been able to award dollars for pro bono counseling sessions for people who maybe have lost their jobs or are in a state where maybe their mental health isn't in a good place right now. Yesterday, we actually were able to, through emergency food and shelter funding, which we in Rutherford County received about $250,000 through the federal government and the CARES Act, we were able to provide some support to domestic violence efforts as well as rent and utility assistance. And next week, we will be in a position to award a little more than $240,000 specifically for food and shelter services in Rutherford County.
As United Way has been called upon to do more than normal in this unnormal situation, how's the United Way doing? How are you being impacted?
So, of course, one of United Way's primary sources of fundraising is through workplace giving campaigns. And so as we see companies maybe closing temporarily or employees laid off, certainly that will have an impact on our ability to raise and mobilize resources for the community. And so that's one reason we wanted to start that COVID-19 response fund, is so that we can continue to meet demand of services in our community, even though our traditional mechanism of fundraising may look different in the short-term future.
Because if someone's laid off and they were contributing to your program, they're no longer contributing.
Right.
You've seen a reduction. Are you willing to tell us like what percent of reduction you've had?
Sure. So we actually haven't seen that yet. The way our kind of fundraising apparatus works is we will probably expect to see that come September for the period March through June. So right now there's a lagging effect, so to speak, so we haven't yet actually seen that, but we have pretty strong indication that there will be some changes in our giving with that.
How has the community responded so far?
So far, the community has really been great. We've been contacted by so many people who have just been interested either in giving to the fund. We have people contacting us about wanting to donate masks that they've made to local nonprofits. We actually on Monday launched a literacy initiative through mid-June, where through our website we're asking people to donate books, flashcards, coloring books, and other materials for students so that we can get those out through local partners, one of which is with the Murfreesboro City School System's Books on a Bus. And so we're hosting that drive for the next 4 weeks. And so people can actually go to our Amazon Wishlist and select the items that they would like to donate and have those shipped directly to our office. And then we'll take those from there and make sure that they get in the hands of children in need. So we've already started receiving all kinds of shipments from people who are interested in contributing that way. But we've just been really fortunate to really have been embraced by the community, and so many people reaching out and wanting to support the work that we're doing in different ways.
What's the best way to access the Amazon wish list?
Yeah, so directly on our website, which is yourlocaluw.org, right on the homepage, there is the Literacy Day of Action graphic. And so when you click on that, it'll take you to a list of the resources that are needed, as well as a link to the Amazon wish list.
I noticed that you have also been using texting as a way of reaching people. Are there other methods that you're using in order to reach the community?
Yeah, so obviously texting, email, social media. We've been doing some letter campaigns. For us, a lot of our support, as I mentioned earlier, comes through the workplace. So we've also been in touch with CEOs of companies. Many of them have been in a position to have dollars that they can provide support to the COVID-19 fund through sponsorship or various funds that they have set aside. So we've just been so fortunate, as I mentioned, to just have been receiving this support that we have through this.
How are those funds distributed?
Yeah, so we actually have a committee that's a board-level committee that oversees all of the funding recommendations to our board. And so and just like in this situation, when we made the first round of awards, they oversaw that process as we received applications through that RutherfordCannonRelief.com website, reviewed those and determined that those priorities, as I mentioned earlier, were mental health, substance abuse, child care, food, and shelter, and so began to make awards based on those priorities. The funding,
So you sit down and analyze some of those things, the needs that are coming in and how widespread they are, and then a decision is made, well, we need to put the funding in this area.
Right. And we actually have a website linked to 211 that gives us real-time data on the volume of calls, the types of needs, the geographical location of those calls, so we can see if there's a particular need concentrated in a certain zip code or a certain area of the community.
When you look at that data, do you ever discover some surprises that you weren't expecting?
I don't know if we've necessarily discovered surprises. It is interesting to see those trends. Right now, we're seeing a higher concentration of calls related to housing in the northern end of Rutherford County, more in that kind of Laverne area. So it's interesting to see from year to year or month to month maybe how those trends change. When you look at last year's 211 information compared to this year's, there was a huge spike in the calls for housing in March when everything with COVID began to accelerate. So it's just very interesting to kind of look at points in time and compare the data between those 2 points.
You have a thing called Day of Action. Mm-hmm. Is that still proceeding?
So not in its traditional format. The literacy initiative that I mentioned earlier is actually going to be our day of action for this summer. So we're collecting those books and those supplies for children so that we can get them in their hands early on in the summer.
What was the thinking behind changing that?
We saw an opportunity to, collect books, as we saw so many of our students are going to have been out of school probably for about 5 months by the time that they start back in August, assuming that they do. And so we know that there typically is what's called a summer slide or a summer setback anyways in a typical year for those with reading. So we saw that, this was an opportunity to get those books in the hands of children to help regress that slide. One of the things that we also are going to be doing at the end of the summer is collecting school supplies through our Stuff the Bus program to get those back into the hands of students as they start school back in August.
The work of the United Way obviously typically involves reaching out to people, maybe going to their homes and delivering services or making contact in whatever way you need to in order to help them. So with COVID-19, that changes everything. How have you had to deal with that?
So many of our programs that we partner with or that we fund have had to transition to a virtual setting, which is not always as ideal as being able to offer that service in person. But instead of just completely disrupting the service altogether, transitioning to a virtual setting is really the next best option.
But you can't do that with every service.
Right.
If you have to deliver clothes or food to someone, that still has to happen. Have you had to change some of the way you do that?
So with the food programs that we work with, they are still providing food options for people who want to come to their location, or maybe there's a mobile pantry setting. So those are still in place. As you said, you can't do that virtually. But any kind of service that can be has transitioned to a virtual setting. But some you still have to keep moving forward with so that people can get the services they need.
What about volunteers? You always need volunteers. Are there opportunities out there now for people to take advantage and participate and help you all?
Yeah, so on that RutherfordCannonRelief.com website, there's actually a volunteer tab, and there's a special COVID section for volunteerism. So we've worked with a few local partners to be able to identify opportunities to volunteer that involve you never having to leave your home. One of which is writing encouraging notes to those who are receiving food bags, for example, from one of our partners, one of which is also the literacy initiative to be able to order books and distribute those books to children in need. So there's on that website, there is a volunteer tab related specifically to COVID opportunities for volunteerism.
And what about the issue of donating? We've talked about that in terms of the text messaging that people are getting, but let's say there's someone listening and they want to participate, they realize there's a big need out there. How can they do that?
Yeah, so again, on the RutherfordCannonRelief.com website, right on the homepage, there's a tab to donate. You can also go to our main website, which is yourlocaluw.org, and there's also a link there to be able to donate as well.
So is there anything that we haven't discussed that you feel like is important to get out to the community right now about what United Way is doing or about the need that exists in our community?
I would say one of the most important things that I want people to know is just to really be aware of that 211 service. It's as simple as calling 211, just like you would 911. You can also go to their website, uw211.org. That really is the greatest opportunity to connect people in need with the resources that are available. As I mentioned earlier, there's several thousand services just in Middle Tennessee that are affiliated with 211. So whether it's someone who's listening that may be in need or someone they know who could have a need, I would just really want people to be aware that that service is available. It's funded by United Way. It's free for the caller. It's confidential. It's 24/7. So it's a really important service for our community that sometimes I think is underutilized.
Easy to remember, 211 for United Way, and that would probably even include if you wanted to volunteer. You could call and say, "I'd like to be a part of it. How do I do that?"
Yeah, so 211 on the other side, you can call to receive help, but if you want to give help, you can also call 211, and they can connect you with opportunities to give help as well.
Great, Meagan. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've been talking to Meagan Flippin. She's the president and CEO of the United Way of Rutherford and Cannon counties. For more information on the City of Murfreesboro, visit www.murfreesborotn.gov. You've been listening to Insider, the official podcast for the City of Murfreesboro. Until next time, I'm Mike Browning, and thanks for joining us.